Hello, and welcome to episode 74 of Mark Talks About His Stuff. Today is the 29th of March 2021, and for some reason, and I can't work out why, the past has been on my mind a lot recently, and I've been thinking about who I was 30 years ago, the type of things I used to do 30 years ago, and to be really honest, I miss crap old rock pubs and indie discos from 30 years ago because I'm not going anywhere, never leaving the house, and we're still in a form of lockdown, although apparently there is a way out. Today I'm going to be talking about an album that's very, very important to me, something that really was, I think, a life-changing record and had a big impact upon shaping who I am today. Pet Shop Boys, actually. Now, this, unlike some of the other albums which I've talked about, I remember this album. I remember buying it. I remember loving it. I remember playing it. I remember everything about it. And when I first encountered this record, I was 14 years old in a suburb in Birmingham, which I've mentioned before. And, you know, my records were my friends. I had actual real life friends as well, but my records were my friends. And this album came as a recommendation from a friend of mine. And I was brought into it by the song It Couldn't Happen Here, which had orchestration by Angelo Badalamenti. And Angelo Badalamenti did the score for David Lynch's Blue Velvet film. And I love movies. So that's how I got in. I listened to it, and then all of a sudden it was like the walls of my life turned to glass, and I could see for miles and miles and miles. I have mentioned before on a previous episode about my favourite albums, how important this record is. You're going to get pretty much 45 minutes of me telling you this album is a banger, to put it technically. But it changed my life. It changed who I was. I was quite snobby about pop music and rock music. I was like, oh, that's a bit vulgar. I like movie music. And then I realised I was really, really enjoying the stuff on movie soundtracks. So, you know, those crappy 80s compilations that went with movies that were full of American singers with mullets and bongo drums and songs about feeling the fire and touching the heat and all that type of stuff. And I was like, that's good, but it could be better. And it was when I listened to albums like this, I realised how much better it could be. This is my original copy I bought when I was 14 from the town centre in Birmingham, and it rarely comes out to play these days. This edition is the American version of the album that was released in early 1988 and was available and released in America. The reason that I bought the American edition is because it had a 12-inch single in it, always on my mind. And make no mistake about it, I like pop music. The Pet Shop Boys were not some small itty bitty band. You know, they'd had 4 number ones by the time they got to the end of the Actually campaign. And it would have been 5 number ones had Rick Astley not released Never Gonna Give You Up, which was number 1 the week that What Have I Done to Deserve This came out. What Have I Done to Deserve This was at number 2. And actually is a very British record. Much like my experiences of other pop groups, you know, and films. I was fed up of living in a world where I saw America as the cultural ideal. I didn't recognise the world that was in a lot of American movies. I didn't recognise yellow taxi cabs, paying for things in dollars and cents, and being able to walk around with guns openly and brazenly on your hip. I was, you know, the world I lived in was about repression, poverty, austerity, Thatcherism, buses, concrete, brutalism. That was the world I grew up in the 80s. And let's not forget bombing the hell out of the Arges and being scared of the 4-minute warning and the nuclear war, because Threads had been on television. And this copy, as you can see, has seen an awful lot of love. All of the sides have got holes in, not including the ones which it's not intended to have holes in. And this is an album that really, really changed who I was. First and foremost, I think it was also one of the first albums that really talked to me about identity, and this is one of the things I've always clung to in music. And I'm sure you've noticed when I talk in other episodes about how much I really, really listen to the words in songs. And you know, bad music can make up for good words, but bad words over good music is a terrible, terrible pill to swallow. and one that I absolutely hate. So I'm going to go back a little bit to the beginning. The first single from the album, It's a Sin. And on the American label, the American 7-inch of It's a Sin, by the way, it says it's from the forthcoming album, Jealousy. The album had a title change later on. And It's a Sin was released in a number of formats. But first and foremost, I'm going to talk you through some commentary relating to It's a Sin that's in this book annually. I think one of the strangest things about this song is just how strange a concept a pop song about sin can be. You know, the idea that someone can do a song about sin, religion, the concept of morality. It's the kind of language and the kind of concepts that weren't really dealt with in popular song. And It's a Sin was not originally, I think, intended for Pet Shop Boys to release. It was one of the earlier songs that they wrote. So there are several songs that they wrote for the album, actually, that they wrote in their early years. So Rent, It's a Sin, One More Chance, and the B-side of one of the later singles, I Get Excited, You Get Excited Too, were all recorded right in the band's very, very early days, in very embryonic arrangements. And the band had time to think through what those songs were going to be and how they were going to be delivered. But as Neil says in here, is that they were originally going to give the track to somebody else. A singer called, I think, Miguel Brown, who'd just done a song called He's a Saint, He's a Sinner. And he said, another song with sin in the title is no good, is it? And so they didn't use it in the end. And they did start recording it, by the way, 1986. For Please, but then they had too many songs. They had Rent as well. They had One More Chance that they also recorded in the Please era, but they hadn't finished it. They were running out of time to release the album, and they knew that the song needed a gargantuan production, to quote their own words. So they decided to make It's a Sin the first song to be released from the actually album. If you're a Pet Shop Boys fan, you will also have this book, 100 Lyrics and a Poem. And if you don't, then I've had the good liberty of buying it for you. And in it, you know, Neil's very, very clear about it. It says, in St. Cuthbert's Grammar School, Newcastle upon Tyne in the 60s, the boys are being warned about the sinfulness of all sexual behaviour except when practised within marriage for the purposes of reproduction. And yeah, that's a concept that really, really kind of clung to me or stuck to me when I was 14 or 15. Is I was very uncertain around who I was, what my sexual orientation was, around what I wanted to look like, who I wanted to be, how I wanted to live. I was having to find out all this stuff on the fly, whilst also being 14-year-olds and basically being a raging bag of hormones in an all-boys school, like pretty much all of my peers were at the time. I'm not going to apologise about that. I am who I am. I had glasses, and that instantly made me a target for some people who are frankly scumbags and probably still are. And I found that my adolescence was really, really difficult. I really, really hated it. And I think being 14, 15, 16, and probably now as well, being that age is really, really difficult because you're not a child and you're not an adult and you're trapped in a body that doesn't do what you want it to, does things you don't want it to. You have feelings and emotions that you feel in a very, very concentrated, almost dangerous way, in the fact that they're so concentrated. You've got all of this power but no ability to control it. And also, you're trying to find out who you are. Economically, you're invisible. Unless you're very, very rich, you're pretty much sidelined by society. You're not taken seriously. It's a really, really difficult time to be alive. And in through all of that, this record really spoke to me around what it was to be someone. And so, for example, the lyric that goes, when I look back upon my life, it's always been with a sense of shame. I've always been the one to blame. And no matter what I want to do, or no matter when or where or who, it's a sin. That the concept is, nature. How can nature be unnatural? And if nature tells you to be gay or to be straight or to be somewhere in between on the great big traffic lights of sexuality, I very much felt that I was guilty of some crime which I didn't even know was a crime, which to me felt natural, which was to be confused and to be exploring who I was. And obviously the title, It's a Sin, has become very, very popular. or has gained an extra resonance with the recent Russell T Davies show that's been on television. And when I started going out in Birmingham, and I was fluid in my tastes, what I found was, it was very dangerous to not be 100% straight in the early 90s and the late 80s. Very dangerous indeed. And you had to learn that to speak is a sin, and you had to learn that how to behave and how to signal and code various things, and how to project yourself in a way that to the untrained eye would look innocuous, but you would be able to pick up some of the signs of a secret language. You had to learn how to live differently. You had to know where the certain places were to go, and if you wanted to go there, there were routes that you could take that would make it not obvious that you were going there. So if you got off a bus, for example, you got off at a different stop and you walked a longer way, a safer way to get to that place. And again, on the way back, you had to do exactly the same thing, and you had to dress in a way that could convincingly pass for innocuous as well. So if you felt a certain way, or you felt that you were a certain person, you had to hide it. Or certainly at the point when you didn't necessarily have much in the way of physical strength around you to be able to do so. So It's a Sin's really, really important song, and I think it spoke to an awful lot of people that were confused about who they were at that point in life, myself included. Over time, that song still resonates with everybody. And it's perhaps one of the reasons why I'm not necessarily religious, is that I felt alienated by a belief structure that told me that I was wrong for being who I actually was. It's a very difficult thing to be in, and actually, and this is something which I think some people don't necessarily understand, is for me, I find watching programs that are set in a certain environment, set in working class environments, tough worlds, poor worlds, difficult worlds. So things like Shameless, things like It's a Sin, I don't watch them because it's actually traumatic to watch them, because it reminds me of the society and the area that I grew up in. And although some people may think, oh, you had I had a house. Yeah, I had a house which had attitudes in it. I lived on a street that had attitudes in it. I lived in a suburb that had attitudes in it. We lived near rough parts of town, and parts of town where if you were different, you were to be attacked for being different, because somehow, unless you liked football, cars, girls, and fighting, you were, somehow an enemy. And it was. That's why I don't watch things like Shameless, and why I don't watch things like It's a Sin, because it reminds me of what I've tried to spend all my life trying to escape. And as a human being, all human beings will try to self-actualize, and so we'll try to live in the world that reflects who we are and what we genuinely believe. And also to put ourselves in positions in our lives where we have minimal threats around us. And so to me, watching programs like that just reminds me of everything that I've tried to escape all my life, which is being victimized, targeted, bullied, and marginalized by people whose opinions I don't respect. And so that's why It's a Sin is a very, very important song, very important song indeed. And even the cover of It's a Sin kind of indicates the austerity that I felt. Now, our world was certainly growing up, physically was relatively comfortable, but financially I was aware we were precarious, and as an adult and as I grew up, certainly when I was at university, I was dirt poor, and I kind of skipped meals, and I lost weight, and I was unhealthy, and I was always ill as a result. So It's a Sin's a really important song, but I think you all know that anyway, because if you don't, why are you 15 minutes into a video of me talking about the album where it's the lead song? Now, It's a Sin, as a record, by the way, had a number of formats. So there was the 12-inch single, there was the 12-inch remix single, and the concept, by the way, the cover of this is from the video of the song, and the video was directed by Derek Jarman, and it had the 7 deadly sins were represented by physical bodies in here, and this is one of the characters. I think this is the jailer, which was played by Chris Lowe. There's a remix 12-inch. There's also, in America only, by the way, there is a third 12-inch containing Latin remixes by Phil Harding. and these are big and bouncy and meaty, lots of piano, lots of Latin tinges in there, almost like a precursor of the band's bilingual era. And by the way, bilingual is a fantastic name for a single or an album, and obviously the Pet Shop Boys' first CD single was "It's a Sin," and then the next single that came out, and this is one that I've mentioned briefly before, duet with Dusty Springfield. What have I done to deserve this? And what have I done to deserve this is, I mean, for me, when I first heard this, again, I said I was 14. It came out, I think, in August or October. I was 14. And to me, songs about tainted love and love is strange were all abstract concepts. I had no experience of relationships. I've never been in a relationship. I'd never had sex. I've never experienced a lot of the things that adults have experienced. And so to me, a song like What Have I Done to Deserve This? On one hand, it feels a little bit like it's almost a Morrissey parody, actually, because it's exactly the kind of song title that you might expect from Morrissey. But it isn't. It's, a powerful duet. That is also the second song on the album. Here's a 12-inch, by the way. I don't have the CD single because I thought I did, and I looked earlier and I found out that I didn't. And the band were also doing, and here's a remix 12-inch, but this remix 12-inch was only issued in America because the next single didn't get a release in America. It got a release almost as kind of like B-side, double A-side with this. So What Have I Done to Deserve This was released in America several months after it was released in Britain, with some exclusive mixes on that you couldn't get anywhere else in the world. And these mixes have not been on CD. I think one of them has been on the Pop Art Mix compilation box set, but aside from that, it's hard to get. Now, instead of doing a remix 12-inch, effectively the remix 12-inch became this American 12-inch. But the follow-up from that, and by the way, What Have I Done to Deserve This? Was number 2 because of Never Gonna Give You Up. And well, if the Pet Shop Boys were the very first act to get rickrolled, if you want to put about it that way, which is a strange and unusual kind of thing to say. Okay, so writing about this song in annually 1988, Neil says, I've always imagined this to be in America. It's two people, as an older woman who's in charge of a building site and a man who works for her, and they have an affair. He leaves the city when they break up and they both regret it. And this song is about how they are both quite old, and at the end they said, sing, we could have made a deal, we could have made a compromise. And that's a really interesting slant upon the song, not one that I would have seen, certainly not one I would have predicted as a 14-year-old. Really interesting approach to do that. So obviously the album then came out, and the album that we've got, here it is. You've seen it before, you'll see it again. Actually, really powerful album, life-changing album for me, as I've already said. There's something in every single one of the songs on this album that really kind of spoke to me in a way in which a lot of other music didn't do. Even bands that I love, like New Order and Depeche Mode, and to an extent the Smiths, weren't talking about the socio-economic environment which we were living in the way in which this band were. To many extents, actually is a concept album about living life under the jackboot of Thatcherism. And that sounds a really melodramatic statement. But if you think about songs like Shopping, Rent, It Couldn't Happen Here, King's Cross, those songs are dripping in social meaning. I think it's an album that could have only really been as successful or come out in 1987. We've got Shopping, which, by the way, still appears on pretty much every BBC programme about shopping ever. We got Rent, which is about a confused and tangled love relationship, which is a play on the phrase on Rent Boys as well, and hit music. So I listened to this on Saturday. Today's Monday. I listened to it on Saturday when I was walking up to the supermarket and coming back, and it hit me just as hard on Saturday as it did when I was 14 years old. I was like, this is an album that is really bloody brilliant. And I think we've put the concept around this is that when this record was released, I think Margaret Thatcher had just won her third election in 1987. I mean, to me, I was 14. All I'd known as anybody over the age of about 7 was living under a Conservative government, and I don't like the Conservative government, and I don't believe in their ethos, which is to an extent of being, not necessarily caring or keeping an eye out for other people. And as I said earlier, I was economically inactive. I was dirt poor. I was 14. I was marginalised. I wasn't taken seriously as a 14-year-old by society. I was just some kid with bad hair and bad clothes that somehow had been poured into a body that didn't quite fit me. And I felt like I was an alien that was undercover in a world full of people that had their shit together, and I was somehow madly bluffing my way through the whole thing. And not only that, I felt very much the financial cruelty that came with the structure of society at the time. As I said earlier, I don't think we had much money. I really felt that there was so many things that I wanted to do, to read, to listen to experience, to watch, and I couldn't do any of that simply because I didn't have the money. And I know nothing has changed in terms of society. In fact, society has got a lot crueler over the past 34 years since this album was released. But it was the first album that really kind of like articulately expressed rage at the injustice of the structure that we all were living under at the time. So shopping was clearly around a number of things, but also it was around the way in which our government was selling off the people's assets, the railways, the telephone companies, the gas services, the utilities, that they'd been entrusted to look after our national assets, and they were using it and selling it off for their own enrichment. And the approach that they had at that point was pretty much along the lines of, well, if you haven't done it when you had the opportunity to do it, you're schmucks, and we're the people that are going to make the money out of it. So they're buying and selling our history, and how they go about it is no mystery. And shopping's pretty brutal in that respect. It's a song that's around, there's no questions in the house, there's no give and take. I heard it in the House of Commons, everything is for sale. It's pretty blunt around that. And yet, as the cliche about fascism comes, is when fascism arrives, it wears a suit and makes promises. This was a stealth album around how awful it was to live in Britain in 1987. And nobody really kind of tweaked, I think. The band had 4 number ones, a couple of which, were love songs, clearly. So people were thinking it's just a pop band, aren't they? And people weren't taking them seriously because they were on the cover of smash hits. It was a really devious approach and really clever. But what it does mean is it stood up in a way in which I think a lot of other bands' albums from around about this time haven't stood up, because it speaks to eternal themes. And one of the things I do want to mention about the band is that they've never done the nostalgia route. Other bands, such as Echo and the Bunnymen, if you offer them a check to appear in Donnie Darko, they'll cash that check and they'll not think any more about it. They think, great, we've got $2.5 grand, and we didn't have to do anything. Pet Shop Boys were asked to do, I think, West End Girls, to provide West End Girls for Donnie Darko. They refused because they didn't want to be seen as a band that was tied to a certain time, and they didn't want to be seen as only having relevance at that particular time. Whereas other bands just went, we'll take the money. Completely understandable, of course, but there's a longer term strategy around that. So the Pet Shop Boys kind of remove themselves from time in that they've never done an album in full tour. They don't appear on 80s TV shows talking about how terrible it was. None of that stuff. That's not how they work. So the 4th song on the album is Rent, which is the 3rd single from the album. And Rent was only released in the UK. And it was released as a 7-inch. It was released as a 12-inch. There's the 12-inch. And it was released as the AA side with What Have I Done to Deserve This in America. Hence, you can go over that way, or you can turn it round, flip it over, and you can have it as that. So, lovely bit of design, barcode on both sides, and it flips over. There is no right or wrong way, by the way, to have this particular record. I prefer to put it as What Have I Done to Deserve This, because that was the song that was released first. And Rent is a great song, a powerful, dark song. And as Neil says in the book, 100 Lyrics, is we were gradually developing a technique for writing the songs, and the song was written in 1984, by the way, which is you take a brutal or a crude or a funny idea and you romanticize it. The inspiration for the title came for Rent Boys, and the narrative is about between the mistress of a politician and the politician himself. Does she love him and he pays his rent? Does she love him because he pays her rent? And does she love him despite him paying her rent? A deal has been made, and it's not quite clear who's come out best out of that. So it's about the financial transactions that sit alongside love, and parts of rent you can still look at and think, okay, so that still applies today. In terms of things like, as a couple, if you're cohabiting, do you love someone who pays their rent because someone earns more money than you? It's a really, it's a song that I think, and an album which has got more strands to its bow over time. The video for the song was shot at King's Cross, and which is bizarre because King's Cross is the last song on the album, and it's. It's a great song, and Carter USM covered it, by the way, and Carter don't cover bad songs. So what what they thought is that originally, I think when they recorded it with Bobby O, I think what they said is the producer wasn't very happy. It sounded weaker as a high energy song. It just didn't have that subtleness, that texture, and that tentative sensitivity which they needed to re-record it for actually to make it better. So they scrapped the whole thing and they started again. There are demos circulating of the Bobby O version of Rent. It's a chunky big thing. It's not particularly good, actually. You can easily see why it wasn't successful. But in the video, Neil Tennant drives Margie Clark around London, and he's a chauffeur, which is apparently a really, really good Duran Duran song, which sounds a little cynical, but I don't have huge fandom for Duran Duran. I'll explain why in some other episode. So the next song on the album, song 5, is Hit Music. And it's a real kitchen sink drama. There's a line in there: I stand by the kitchen sink, the radio playing songs like Tainted Love and Love is Strange. And in the original lyric, it also included "and Yesterday," by the way, but it didn't scan and fit into the music that Chris had written. So Hit Music is a song that really is about hit music on the radio, which at the time, obviously all songs about love were songs that were abstract concepts to me. So I was standing by the kitchen sink, listening to the radio, playing songs like Tainted Love and Love is Strange, and I had no experience of how strange love could be or how tainted love could be. But also at the same point, it was a song that's very, very British. American songs don't talk about tainted love. They don't talk about kitchen sinks. They don't talk about radios unless it's a radar radio. American songs tended to talk about cars and girls and sunshine and exploding planets and things like that. There were very few songs around standing by a kitchen sink doing the washing up. And I was like, this is really good. This album really, really speaks to the world I live in, because I live in a world of kitchen sinks and radios. But also, it was an album that I knew before I knew it, if that makes sense. It was an album that came from the world that I lived in. Flip the record over, bang, side 2, we have It Couldn't Happen Here, and that's the song that started it all. Now, It Couldn't Happen Here has only been played live twice. It was played live once, I think, in Salford, in Manchester, with an orchestra in 2012, and once at the Royal Albert Hall in 2017. I was there, and that's an incredible show, and that's something I'm going to talk about at another instance. But It Couldn't Happen Here is a one of the first great AIDS songs, I think. And when I was talking earlier about how you couldn't signal who you were or your identity, or you had to do so in code, part of that was around the ignorance that surrounded AIDS. People believed that if you sat on the same toilet with somebody that had HIV, that you would pretty much instantaneously die in a pit of flames. But also around the fact that at the time medicine hadn't evolved to the point where having a positive diagnosis was practically a death sentence. It Couldn't Happen Here was the first of 3 songs about Neil watching one of his friends become iller and sicker and die from the disease. The other 2 are Your Funny Uncle and Being Boring. And he said at one point he had a very, very strange kind of experience with that. On one hand, he was being his international jet-setting pop star, and on the other hand, he was watching his friend die from an incurable disease when he was having his days off and going to visit him in hospital as he became ever, ever weaker. And that's something that once you listen to the song, you kind of think it couldn't happen here, it shouldn't happen here. As a country, Britain made itself out through the process of British exceptionalism to say we're the best country in the world, and that's why all you suckers want to come and live here, but you can't because Britain's fantastic, but it's only England for the English. And it couldn't happen here was a pretty damning kind of statement of that, and it really carries a real kind of tainted seaside sadness which can't really be taken away, no matter how many times we try and pretend that it isn't. Now, on the album, the next song is It's a Sin. When I listen to the album, I switch the songs around. So It's a Sin is the second song, and What Have I Done to Deserve This is the seventh song. And since I've talked about It's a Sin and What Have I Done to Deserve This, we'll go to track 8, which is I Want to Wake Up. Probably the album's weakest link, in my opinion. But an album this strong has very little in the way of weakest links. I Want to Wake Up is a double-edged song about unrequited love, and at the same point about wanting to wake up from this unrequited love. But at the end, the song flips itself round and says, I want to wake up with you. What a lovely sentiment. Not their best song. I don't think they've ever played it live, but a fabulous song on there. Song 9 is Heart, which was their fourth #1 hit single, and Heart was released in I think March 1988. Here are a couple. Here's the 12-inch release. Here's the remix 12-inch release. In a kind of like not a re-recorded fashion, but actually going back to the original mix. So the original version of the song that was originally recorded in the early days for the album was very, very close to the version that became this #1 hit single. There was a big pacier rhythm track. There was guitar by J.J. Bell. It was an all bells and whistles kind of approach. And the demo of Heart had that really catchy high-pitched bit. They thought about submitting it to Madonna but decided not to. They did. I think they were also thinking about perhaps providing it to Hazel Dean, but chose not to as well, if you remember Hazel Dean. And so that first recording with Shep Pettibone is actually the one that they went back to and used for the single. So the single isn't actually a remix. The single is kind of it's a remix of the original version. It's not a remix of the album version. And they were originally planning, I think, to send it to a film called Inner Space, a now forgotten 1987 comedy, and it was going to be called Heartbeat, but they changed the name of it because Joe Moss from Culture Club had a group called Heartbeat UK. And then they took it off the soundtrack to Inner Space, because Inner Space then started adding contemporary songs by bands like Wang Chung, Rod Stewart, in the days when Rod Stewart was a contemporary artist. Now the video for Heart, really, really strange. Ian McKellen's in it. It's based upon the film Nosferatu, and it's kind of like about a love triangle between the story of Dracula and Dracula is the third party of a love triangle who's got this unrequited love for the bride that Neil Tennant is going to be the groom to. It's an okay video, pretty strange, pretty funny, pretty bonkers, pretty out there. Not quite sure what on earth it's got to do with the song, but sometimes that's the way the best videos are. And the last song on actually is King's Cross, and it kind of sums up the whole ethos of the album with the line, "The man standing at the back of the queue was sent to fill the smack of firm government." Very, very clearly, this is a song about government, a song about how they force and shape the society that they're in, and how the government can use its powers to hurt people. And that's very much what it was. It's very, and Neil was quite unambiguous about that. He said that is actually about, feeling a boot from a policeman who's enforcing a government policy, which I thought was pretty bold, actually, to put in the song. They've played it live many, many times. I love King's Cross. It's a great song, and it just closes off a perfect album for me. And as I said, I was 14. I was listening to this, and I was like, somebody sees the world the way I do, and that somebody may have been 20 years older, and grown up in Newcastle, and now be a millionaire. But they saw the world the way I do. And the thing about music is that it provides a comfort. It helps you to understand and navigate your way through the world. And it also makes you understand that you aren't on your own a sole person who's, like the only voice in a sea of madness. When you've got pop music that speaks to you, it helps you understand the world around you and make the world that you live in a better place. And that's what actually did for me. It actually made my world a better place, because I didn't feel so lonely after I listened to that album. I felt comforted, and I felt that there were other people that were pointing in the same direction as me when it came to this world. So that's actually, there's a whole bunch of extra stuff that happens around, actually. And the main thing that came first actually was the band's third #1 single, Always on My Mind, a cover version of Elvis Presley. Now, the band were asked to do a cover version of Elvis Presley for a show by ITV that was shown late at night on Central Television. And I think the show was called Love Me Tender, but I could be wrong. And they had an option. They were tempted with doing Baby Let's Play House, but they decided to do Always on My Mind. Although Baby Let's Play House was kind of used later for a remix of Always on My Mind, which appeared on the subsequent Introspective album, which is going to be the next Pet Shop Boys album I'm going to be talking about. But what they did is that they, as Neil said, we wouldn't have done it if we hadn't been able to do it very differently. So they added an extra chord to it, and I think it's a B sharp at the end of each chorus that isn't in the original, and it makes it far more like a pop song. And they recorded it really, really quickly with David Jacobs, originally as a demo, and originally they were doing that just before they were about to go off and make a film, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. Now, Always on My Mind was very, very popular, and it first saw release on this 7-inch single, and this 7-inch single is available only with Japanese copies of Actually. This version contains the Love Me Tender TV recording of Always on My Mind, which is a different mix and with some different elements to the one that's finally released as a 7-inch single. It's also backed with an exclusive remix of Heart, which is a dub mix, which was produced by Shep Pettibone. And Shep Pettibone's a name that we're going to be seeing a few times over the next few episodes. Always on My Mind was the band's first #1 single. In America, it wasn't in Actually, so as I've mentioned before, it came shrink-wrapped as a 12-inch inside a box set of Actually, which is the version which I bought. And it's got a 12-inch single here. It's got an alternate cover in America of them standing and sitting down on some chairs. No idea why, to be honest. But it's also got a remix on it, a 12-inch mix that features dialogue from a film. And the film is called It Couldn't Happen Here. This film is an abomination, but I'll get back to that later. And Always on My Mind also came as a 12-inch remix by Phil Harding. This is an incredible 12-inch remix. It's a definitive version of the track. I will post a link to it down there on my YouTube. This remix has still yet to be issued on CD, which is mind-bogglingly daft as a decision. But the remix is fantastic, and probably one of my favourite Pet Shop Boys tracks of all time. Now, around the same time, just after Always on My Mind hit #1, there was a single called I'm Not Scared, released by Eighth Wonder. And this was, to all intents and purposes, the singer from Eighth Wonder singing over a new Pet Shop Boys original called I'm Not Scared. Fantastic track. If you love Pet Shop Boys, you've got to listen to this, because this is a Pet Shop Boys song in everything but name, and I absolutely love it. It's backed with a French version called J'ai pas peur, where Patsy Kensit breathily intones in her best Jane Birkin impersonation all the lyrics to I'm Not Scared, but in French. And there's also a bootleg LP of the Abbey Road demos. These are the demos from the Actually album with some alternate mixes on. Probably third or fourth generation, quite hissy, not amazing, not worth tracking down, but they're all on YouTube for free anyway. And as previously mentioned, the final part of the Actually puzzle is a film called It Couldn't Happen Here. This film was released on Blu-ray about this time last year. Otherwise, it had only been available on VHS. It showed in cinemas, I think, in around about June 1988. It's about 90 minutes long. It's a weird, impressionistic, kind of abstract art movie in which the Pet Shop Boys play versions of themselves as they travel from, I think, Clacton-on-Sea through to London via Scunthorpe. And it takes a lot of autobiographical information from the band's lives, wraps those autobiographical elements around the songs which the band had written that were clearly autobiographical, throws in a bit of Biggles and a ventriloquist dummy and a murderous vicar played by Joss Ackland. It is as bad as it sounds. This film is an abomination. I think what they were trying to do was trying to do something kind of like the Beatles' Hard Day's Night, but instead of a sense of humour, they kind of did a sense of po-faced abstract imagery. And the band trusted Jack Bond, the film's director, completely, but Jack got control of the car and crashed it straight into a wall. It's nonsense. There's a fantastic film which could have been made out of the songs from Actually and Please, which dealt with the autobiographical story of two boys growing up in seaside towns and coming down to London and trying to make their fortune. And this film is not it. This film is bollocks. It looks gorgeous, but it makes no sense whatsoever, and it mistakes mystical, abstract, meaningless, hocus-pocus nonsense bullshit for somehow being far too deep for mere mortals to be able to understand, where really we understand what this film is, and it is undercooked and underthought. It's not very good. Were I not so attached to not destroying my stuff, I'd casually throw it over there, which, by the way, I just have. So, that kind of brings us up to speed with Pet Shop Boys. Actually, my opinions about the hot pile of celluloid garbage that is It Couldn't Happen Here. The singles, It's a Sin, What Have I Done to Deserve This, Rent, Always on My Mind, Heart, and all the bootlegs and remixes that go with it. Now, the only thing I haven't mentioned so far, and this is one thing I have been saving till last, is one of the rarest records in my collection, although certainly not that rare in the condition in which I have it. This is the Italian 7-inch scarf box set of It's a Sin that was numbered and limited to 1,500 copies. I bought this off the wall at Second City Sounds in Birmingham for £6.95. The last time I looked on Discogs, a copy of this was £150, but I was a 14-year-old kid, and I would buy any old crap with the World Pet Shop Boys printed on it, and I wouldn't even look after it because I was an idiot. Really, I should sell this, although in its current condition it will probably get you about 25 pence. Let's have a look inside the unofficial Pet Shop Boys It's a Sin bootleg 7-inch scarf set. You have a Pet Shop Boys scarf, which I'll open up. You have the 7-inch single of It's a Sin, and you have a bit of cardboard here. Naturally, the 7-inch single does have one of my favourite things in it, a record adapter. This, by the way, there are many different types of record adapter designs. This is my favourite design because this looks like a superhero sign, which is important. And it's an image which I've always been drawn to, is that 7-inch single adapter sign. Because before I encountered 7-inch singles, I wasn't incorrect, but I operated incorrectly. I rotated through the world at slightly the wrong angle, and when I found music was able to make my life a heck of a lot better, which I'm sure I've mentioned to you. Now here is the fantastic, unofficial, not particularly good Pet Shop Boys scarf that comes with It's a Sin. I'm not quite sure when or where anybody would ever wear a scarf like this, and I probably have grossly devalued it by even opening the thing up for the first time since 1987. I don't think I've ever undone this, actually. So that brings us to the end of me talking about records that I love, and this particular issue of me talking about Pet Shop Boys Actually album. I love this band. I love this record. It changed my life. To some extent, I went into this band and went into this record a boy, and I came away from it a lot nearer to being a man. As per normal, usual rules apply. Don't be a dick in the comments. There is somebody that downvotes every video I upload as soon as I upload it. I have no idea why you do that, and get a better hobby, okay? Because it just looks a bit silly and a bit weird. Now, aside from that, I'm going to wrap up here. Thanks for spending 45 minutes listening to me talk about a Pet Shop Boys album. I promise better episodes are coming, and I will be talking through, including lots of records that I love, some records that I don't, and my childhood and growing up in future instalments. But in the meantime, as Jerry Springer used to say, take care of yourselves and each other, and I will see you again. Thank you, and goodbye.